Oh, okay, we're being recorded now. Okay. Got it.
Well, I love you anyway, Cordles.
Yeah. Anyway,
okay. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Richard.
Good. Thank God. Yes.
Can we get everyone to mute their mics, please? Thank you.
All right, everybody, please mute.
Wait a minute. I don't know how to mute. Where's the mute?
You can hear
That's
me.
okay. I'll mute you.
If I just shut up, would that help?
Thank you, Benita.
Speaking of students, I think one of my former
let's
students
Okay,
just
Richard.
texted me.
Are we ready? Okay, we
Ready.
got the chat going. We got the closed caption going. All right, very good. Okay, everybody, welcome to the Journal-isms Roundtable. We had some technical difficulties, but seeing all your lovely faces, there's no issues. Great. All right, we're going to start off with a moment of silence. I wrote just Saturday about the passings of Lisa Shepard and Michelle Marriott. And we lost some good people, as evidenced by all the people who are tuning in to read about them and to remember them. So let's pause for a minute and remember Lisa Shepard, who was with us in our in-person roundtables for a while, and Michelle Marriott, who many of us know just from NABJ or the Times or the Post or other places. So let's pause for a minute. Okay, thank you very much for that. And we just heard, as people were talking earlier, about Ahmad Jamal, and so we have some heroes who have departed. So we also have some people to celebrate, and the first person we're going to celebrate here is Judon Marshall, who has just been named the president and CEO in Charlotte, North Carolina, of the public radio station there, WFAE. And some of us may know Judon from other places like the Charlotte Observer and the Washington Post. So let's raise a glass to Judon and wish her well in her new job.
Congratulations.
Congratulations to Judon Marshall.
Thank you.
Charlotte in the house.
Charlotte in the house.
Hey, Miss Baltimore.
Okay. Judon, do you want to say a few words? Tell us what you got planned for all those lucky people in Charlotte.
Thank you. I'm also here with a few of my colleagues, Dante Miller, Gwendolyn Glenn, and Sarah Mobley Smith, whom some of you may know Sarah and Gwen from the Washington, D.C. area too, where they both were journalists, and they're now here with me in Charlotte. We're doing great things. We're trying to figure out the future of local media and fill the news desert gaps and, sort of taking up the space of legacy media as we try to expand our public media station here and move, boldly into the digital realm. Public media has been a little bit behind other legacy media and moving toward digital, but those are things that we're doing. And, our team, Sarah and Dante and Gwen, are also helping us engage more with communities of color and, through culturally competent journalism is how we like to talk about it here. So we're up to a lot, doing a lot of great things. I miss some of these very familiar faces from my DC time. I was at the Post for 17 years. I remember today why I love Courtland so much. So it's just good to see you all. Thank you. I'm sorry, I forgot my colleague Mary C. Curtis, who I just also see is on the call, and who is an extended member of the WFAE family.
Thank you. Looking forward to even working with you more.
Okay, very good. I was getting an echo, so if I don't hear everybody, that could be the reason. It's so good to see all of you here, especially people that I hadn't seen in a while, and that's one of the good things about the roundtable. It's the purpose is for networking and to learn. And in this format for Zoom, the networking can take place in the chat room. So feel free to use the chat room to send messages to everyone or to particular people. Let's see. Oh, I didn't mention how we got started, which I'll be very brief about. We started in 1999 when some friends wished another friend well, as she was departing to get a doctorate in California. She said, keep these things going. And we have. We met monthly at a local restaurant in Washington, D.C. Until the pandemic, when we went to Zoom, and that has radically increased the number of participants as well as the locations of folks. I see Cynthia Kirkwood is here from Portugal, and Joe Ritchie's in Thailand, and who knows where everyone else is. So let's move on to the first segment here. We're going to talk about Randall Robinson, who many of us knew and or covered or worked with, and is one of the people of the 20th century who had a lot to do with the progress we've made globally in terms of justice for Africa and the diaspora. So we have with us Cecelie Counts and Gwen McKinney. Joe Davidson, something came up, he's not going to be with us. Allison Davis, Courtland Milloy, and Randall Pinkston. Randall, I don't see you just yet. Are you here? Can I see?
He's there.
Okay, good. All right, we want to start off, the whole reason we want to talk about Randall is to discuss what his legacy is, what we can take from the example that he set. And I want to start with Cecelie, since she worked with him most closely at TransAfrica. So Cecelie, I'm going to give everybody 3 minutes to summarize, and then we can all join in. So Cecelie, would you tell us what would you say is Randall's legacy? What should we remember about Randall as we all carry on our own lives?
Well, I think the most important thing I learned from Randall is how to lose. While it's easy to remember the victories, it's the painful lessons we learn from losing that I know have kept me going and prevented a lot of us from becoming like William Monroe Trotter and, committing suicide because the struggle seems so long and so hard.
Oh my goodness.
Well, I'm just saying that, when you look at the life of somebody like William Monroe Trotter, who struggled and it got so exasperated that, he committed suicide, the defeats are a lot more painful and last longer than the victories, which are, in the scope of things, relatively momentary. I mean, people remember the Free South Africa movement and the work around Haiti, which restored Aristide to the presidency. But while I was at TransAfrica, we struggled against the invasion of Grenada. We struggled to educate people about the problems of Burundi and Rwanda and why there was a looming crisis there. We tried to educate people about the plight of Black people in the Pacific Islands. And now we see Vanuatu speaking up about climate change and taking issues there. But we realize that, most people, including too many Black people, name Jamaica when asked to name 3 African countries. The level of information was so low. The stakes were so high. And even when we won something like the passage of the 1986 Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act, we saw that the Reagan administration used all its regulatory power to eviscerate the law. And those lessons were so important, not just to Randall, but to the community who knew him, people like Wade Henderson, who worked with TransAfrica back then on the unfairness of US immigration policy and the plight of the Haitian refugees and the Liberian refugees who were treated so poorly compared to refugees from Europe. And today we see the same struggle over and over again. As one of my former colleagues said, it's like we're on the hamster wheel from hell, in that our struggle continues. And meanwhile, we understand why Cabral said people are not struggling for ideas. Those of us who've had an opportunity to get an education are really, no matter how we perceive of ourselves, part of a global elite who have time to read and write and think. We're not struggling every day for our bread. And so many people around the world are struggling every day, focused on survival. They can't participate in the way that we would have to have them participate if we were really going to achieve fundamental change. So again, I would say the fundamental lesson Randall taught us is how to keep going when you lose so much, so often.
Well, all right. Thank you, Cecelie. Now, Gwen McKinney also worked with Randall doing her as a communication strategist, and I'm sure she has an enlightening observation for us. Gwen, take it away for 3 minutes.
Okay, so I unmute. Hi, everyone. So great seeing some old buds from way back in the day. There's that magic eyes. We know, you know who we're talking about. The magic eye that never shuts, Sharon Farmer. I will say this, and when Richard reached out and asked me if I would join, I said, of course, because I really wanted to just honor Randall. And then he said something, so you were his PR person. I said, wait a minute.
That's right,
I pushed back, everyone, because PR and BS are kind of synonymous these days. And that's why when he said communication strategist, I smiled. And I'd like to tell all of you, my roots are in journalism, first and foremost, from the 70s. Well, I don't have to worry about dating myself with you guys. So I'll say from the 70s forward, and once a journalist, always a journalist, in terms of that incisive understanding of recording history as it happens. So quickly, I posted this piece, The Anatomy of the Haiti, I say public education, but Howard Kurtz said public relations campaign. That was back in June 1994. And Randall, actually, my firm was on retainer with Randall. And we worked, I mean, boy, Cecelie, you're taking us back. I wasn't a hired gun for the Free South Africa movement. I was in the trenches like everyone else marching. But I guess fast forward a decade, and then I became the hired gun from a K Street firm. But let me say this about Randall. That piece, I read it when Richard asked me to have this conversation. And I was just like, God damn, this Howard Kurtz really jammed us. And as I read the piece, the reason why, and I'm going to tell you all a secret. Randall was furious about this article. He was very angry because Randall Robinson, and anyone who knows him knows, he was an enigma. He wanted to do a hunger strike, but he wanted the world to know. How do you do that without, and especially back in the 90s, without media, without the Washington Post and the New York Times and NBC. How do you tell the world? I mean, there was no social media, and the internet really was just in its infancy, but it was something very tawdry for him. Although he was extremely sophisticated, y'all. He understood that media was a critical element to really, as Cecelie says, launching these campaigns and not losing, but winning. And you couldn't do it without media. And most of you who are working journalists had a decent relationship with Randall because he recognized that was important. But it was something about this piece. And I guess because it was tell-all and it laid out the rollout. And as I read it, I read it, recently, that damn Howard Kurtz was very cynical because what he was doing was jamming my firm and also Randall, some kind of way trying to say that there was something inauthentic about what Randall did. I will let you all read the article and it will speak for yourself. And because I'm so close to it, when I read it in 1994, I had a different perspective. When I read it now, maybe it's because now I think PR and BS are kind of synonymous, and that might be it. But the bottom line is that Randall was a passionate change agent towards the last days of his time here in the United States. And he was an expat. He was very disenchanted with this country. And when he left and went to St. Lucia, the beloved home of the love of his life, his wife, it was his only way to survive and continue to live. Towards the very end of his time here, he wrote The Debt. And if Randall had stayed, he would have intensely launched a reparations campaign. This was someone who came out of an elite background, but he definitely, his energies and his instincts and his love were with the masses and with the people in struggle, truly. And that's one of the things that was so remarkable about Randall. So I will stop there and I invite you all to take a look at that article. You tell me if it's cynical or not. Kind of when I read it, it's like, Lord have mercy, but I'll stop.
Okay. One other question though, Gwen, and that is, what can the rest of us take from his example, from his life?
I think what we can take from his life and from his example, Cecelie said how to lose, but I say how to win and how to fight. And there's never a one-stop shop to the struggle. There are many entries and points of departure. So I think the lesson you learn from Randall is be creative, be smart, and figure out how. As much as he thought the way the projection of the hunger strike was to get attention, there was really nothing wrong with that. In fact, it was everything right with it. But he was furious, more with my partner than me. And I can tell you all that. He was furious because he felt we should have just, been quiet. And there was so much interest in this campaign and how we did it. And by the way, the title was A Striking Success. And I think that Randall's example is to be humble and bold. Can you do both simultaneously? I think he did.
All right. Well, one of the pleasures of having set this up and invited people here is hearing stories from folks, from the journalists who were covering Randall and they all had some reminiscences. In fact, Brenda Wilson just joined the chat here, and she was one of the people who recalled interacting with Randall in her role as a journalist. So we do have our panel of journalists. We have, as I said, Allison Davis, Courtland Milloy, and Randall Pinkston, and others who in the room who cover them, such as Carlin Barker, covering those protests at the embassy. So how about Allison? Tell us what you learned from Randall and what we can take away from his example.
Well, thank you, Richard. Two things. I wanted to, Gwen, I hate to correct you, but it's St. Kitts.
Yeah.
I think Richard and I,
No,
That's right.
not St. Lucia. My family's from St. Kitts, and one of the last conversations I had with Randall was about his move to St. Kitts. His wife had grown up with many of my cousins on the island, and he was so looking forward to living in St. Kitts with Hazel. And I've actually talked to some cousins since his death, and they shared with me some pictures of the Prime Minister laying flowers at his home. And I asked, how it was being treated there and in St. Kitts, and he told me like he was a statesman.
Yes.
And so he found a home, and I was delighted that it was the home of my paternal side. That said, I have to thank Gwen. So I hit you on one hand.
no, corrections are important.
But I have to thank you, Gwen, because when I was with the Today Show, I think that we were arguably the first national television show to put Randall on the air, and it was probably due to you, Gwen, because you were always pushing for voices that were never heard in broadcast media. And I remember so vividly trying to explain to my executive producer where South Africa was, and why this was important. And you would bring these wonderful voices, and then it was up to me, I was the only Black show producer at the time, to convince folks that this was not only a story that needed to be done, but this was a story that we really did need to educate people about a side of the world that they very rarely heard about. And so, and Randall was so masterful at breaking it down to, as we used to say in television news, a fifth grade audience. He really, really knew how to bring it home and to share with our audience the importance of the stories. And so again, I have to really thank you, Gwen, because it was you that not only knocked on our doors, but really, really made those of us who were in these newsrooms understand the importance of making sure that these stories were told. I think we probably had Randall on maybe a half a dozen times. I also remember heard the name Wade Henderson come up. I'm not sure if that was you, Gwen, or somebody else said, you have to put this guy on. And we did. And I'm so sorry now that we don't have those voices now, or they're being a tad bit diluted with all the other things that are happening now. But, we need to hear the Randall Robinsons of the world. It's so important because, as we've all discussed here, those issues still exist and the ignorance still exists.
Thank you, Allison. Well, while we were having this chat, I just learned, and that's why I asked in the chat if Karen DeWitt was here. She just posted a note about another passing that just took place, and that was somebody else who fits into the perspective that Randall brought, and that her name is Wadeen Henderson. And Wadeen worked for USA Today, and I think she had been on the West Coast before that. And I remember her covering African Liberation Day, the first one in 1972. and Wadeen was active in that. I see, I checked while we were talking about, I checked Facebook, and there is a note from her, from a relative. It says, on behalf of my mother, Deborah Brown, I regret to announce the passing of my aunt, Wadeen Henderson. Aunt Dean transitioned yesterday, April 16th, just one day after her 76th birthday. I solicit your prayers for my mom and my aunt Bernice in the loss of their sister, as well as our entire family during this difficult time. Aunt Dean was a true treasure, a wealth of knowledge, and a humble servant to all she encountered. This world is a better place simply because of the love she showed everyone and her passion for true change and justice. I ask that you please extend grace to my mother at this time, as she is receiving several calls. To know and love Aunt Dean was a true honor and a privilege, and she will be sorely missed. So, we have people whose courage and quest for justice need to be replaced and embellished by those of us who are still here. Let's move on to Courtland Milloy, who was also one of the people who was recommended when people talked about having this remembrance of Randall. So Courtland, what are your 3 minutes or less?
Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay,
I
the
can hear you.
reason I recommend it because by James Hudson.
That's right.
I wrote a column within the first year of the Free South Africa movement, starting up, that commented on an effort by the Afrikaners to come to DC and tour the public school system to see how we educated the Black people here. And I thought, yeah, let them come and see how beautiful and smart our children are and all the resources, what we get out of it and what they're losing as a result of not educating people. And I thought that was a really great column, but I got a call from James Hudson and Randall the very next day inviting me to lunch. And I thought, they're gonna compliment me on my column. And it was a great lunch, but it was also some woodshed in it.
Oh.
Because, as it was mentioned, Randall had a way of breaking things down to 5th grade level. So he gave me a tutorial on constructive engagement and how that was, as Desmond Tutu would say, the most immoral, evil thing that could ever be devised, because they were liars. They did not mean a word that they said about helping anybody Black. And by the time he finished, taking this whole policy of apartheid support back to Nixon and Kissinger and up to Reagan and Alexander Haig and George Shultz, and he did it nicely, I began to see the scope of what the opposition was about. So first thing is, he was a very good teacher. He's super smart. And just like with Hudson and all the other brothers that I met back then, there was an electricity. There was Mickey Leland, there was Charles Diggs, there was Bill, what was Bill? William Clay and Bill Gray, all of these guys. And it was almost like you had a little posse there, but you needed a movement because the opposition was unlike anything I could imagine. There were all of the preachers, all of the evangelicals, these conservative think tanks. And Randall was ready to do battle with them, but he was very kind to me. And he says, do you want to be with Mandela and Tutu and, Mary Frances Berry and Walter Fauntroy and me? Or do you want to be with de Klerk and Botha and, these crazy people who mean Black people no good? And that's what it was. So I was embraced. I didn't know anything about Africa. I'm from Louisiana. We have a prison there named Angola because, that's where people came to work the plantation. Yeah. And, but I wanted in on the movement. There was an electric, there hadn't been anything like that since the late, since the 60s or since the Metro 7 movement. you know. So that's what he was. He was a teacher. He was patient. If I had written that column today, Twitter would tear me apart, and there would be no coming back to that side, you know, because he was one-on-one with you. He took time to talk to you. And one thing he made clear, that in a fight like that, although there are a lot of celebrities involved, you have to keep principles, PL, you know, principles, not school principles, but your principles above the personalities, you know. And that was going to be the hardest thing to do, because at some point you were going to come in conflict with your friends, as he did with Ron Brown, as he did with Vernon, as he did with a whole bunch of people, you know what I'm saying? You know, it's got to be the principles. And he stood for the principles up until he, you know, it was just terrible. So that's it. A man who was a power of example and who was a good and generous teacher.
By Vernon, you mean Vernon Jordan?
Yep.
Okay. And we can't forget that the whole Robinson family too. A lot of us knew Max Robinson.
Yes.
And Jewel Robinson.
Yes.
So that was quite a family to come out of.
It's
and
Richmond.
Also, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying it was a Richmond family, and that's
right. That's where I was going.
Okay.
And if you get a chance, maybe I'll put this in the chat. Michael Paul Williams of the Times-Dispatch in Richmond wrote a column about his years there and how that helped shape him, you know, during the time of segregation for the whole family. Actually, I remember reading about how Max, he could anchor, but they couldn't show his face on the air at that time.
Wouldn't let his dad come through the front door of a hotel.
Is that right?
Yeah, and to honor him, his dad was going to be honored for the great, you know, coaching he did. And at the hotel where they were going to fed him, they wouldn't let him. They're going to have to go around back. He went back home and said, "Forget that." You know,
Imagine.
I'm from radical. They come from we don't take any crap stock. You know, who knew a hard law guy taking over the school president's office? You know, that was like unheard of to me.
Right.
Anyway, that's it. I'm done.
All right.
So Richard, can I quickly jump in just to tell a very quick story, because everybody's talking about South Africa, and I don't.
This is Brenda Wilson. Just to introduce you.
And I was at NPR in 70. I went there in 78, 79, right? So this was before the protest against apartheid had escalated to such a great extent. And the negotiations were going on between Britain and Rhodesia. I mean, I almost got thrown out of something with, I think it was Ian Smith, Claire Booth Luce, and Harry Byrd. As I said, my God, I'm in the same room with these people that my parents in Virginia had told me about. Harry Byrd, all these white-haired folks, you know? And here I am, a reporter, junior reporter. But beyond that point, the negotiations were going on, and they were going to have Lord Carrington on the air on Morning Edition. And nobody else to say anything about it, as if anybody else had anything to say about it. And I don't know what I knew, but I knew enough at the time, even though I was a 20-something, to call Randall. And I'm just I wasn't the senior producer. I was just an underling. And I said, Randall, you need to get here at 5 a.m. And, you know, because we need a counterpoint to Lord Carrington. This was when the negotiations, I don't even remember what the issues were, but I just said, get here at 5 and I'll just get you on somehow. And sure enough, he showed up at 5 a.m. for Morning Edition on National Public Radio. I was an overnight producer there, and we sat around and chatted, and he went on live as a counterpoint to Lord Arrington. And the senior producer came in shortly later after, you know, Randall had done what he did, and he said, it worked. You still have a job. It worked, you know, because Randall was so good. And it's sort of like, I don't know who I was as a kid at the time, practically, working as a producer, but I just remember that he showed up at 5 a.m. because I was just gonna, not so much sneak him in, I was just gonna put him on. Changed the board, erased it, stuck him in, and he was great. What can I say? Anyway, that's all. That's my story.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Brenda. And somebody sent me a nice photograph of a trip to Cuba that Randall took with some journalists, and among them were Ellis Coase and Randall Pinkston. And Randall's with us now. Randall, what do you think we should take away from Randall's example?
Well, first of all, it's always good to be with my friends, and let me add to that moment of silence of memory of those who've departed.
Yes.
A lot of thoughts swirled through my head. So before I met Randall, I met Max, his brother. I spent an unforgettable evening with Max at WTOP, showing me how an anchorman handles producers. He brought me into his office and he said, watch this. And the guy comes in and gives him the script, and Max ripped him from A to Z. And when the guy left, Max said to me, it really wasn't that bad, but you have to keep them on their toes. Remember that. So anyway, so my introduction to Randall really involved my memory of his brother and the impact that he'd had on me as a young journalist. We both worked for Post News stations at the time. I was in Jacksonville. Max was at TOP in DC. And Randall kind of took me under his wing. I was a reporter, but I have to confess, I was more a mentee than a reporter with Randall. He was, as someone mentioned, a great teacher, Courtland. He was a great teacher. And in my opinion, what Randall did was to make more people aware of the international import of people of African descent and our importance around the world and how we were being screwed everywhere. And of course, we all know about the South Africa protests. I didn't know about some of the other things that he was doing. I mean, he had an international perspective. The stories that I covered about his efforts had to do mostly with Aristide and the hunger strike. I was in Washington at the time in the Washington Bureau.
Wait, I hope everybody knows who Aristide is.
Oh, Jean-Bertrand Aristide Titi, who was the elected president of Haiti and kicked out of office with the assistance, many say, believe, of the U.S. Went into exile in the U.S. during the administration of George Herbert Walker Bush. There were all of these public pronouncements about we have to restore the democratically elected president of Haiti, and then wink, wink, we'll never do it. And Randall pushed the administration to make it happen. Bush didn't do it. Clinton tried to. The first effort didn't work, and later it did. Aristide was restored to power. But the hunger strike was to bring public attention to the unfairness of ejecting a democratically elected leader of the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. Never mind Cuba. That is to say, Cuba's relations with Aristide is why the Bush administration and the American administration didn't want to help Aristide. That's one of many reasons. Randall mentions me in one of his books and the effort that I made as a general assignment reporter in the Washington Bureau to try to get more coverage, because he gave me a lot of tips and I could not get most of them on,
That was at CBS, correct?
Yeah, at CBS. The powers that be just were not interested. I got some stories done, but not many. The Cuba trip that you talk about was, as I recall, it was focused on healthcare, as well as the role of people of African descent in Cuba. The people on the trip included Camille Cosby, Norman Francis,
of Xavier.
Yeah.
President of Xavier.
President of Xavier. And the night before we came home, we all had an extraordinary couple of hours with Castro. who gave us a history of the world, as was his wont to do with people. And then, of course, he eventually talked about baseball. But anyway, Randall, fantastic. I used that trip. I convinced CBS to allow me to go to Cuba. Well, it really wasn't a pretext, but sort of was. Danny Glover was also on that trip. And as you know, Danny later became very prominent in the last days of TransAfrica. And I did a profile for Sunday Morning on Danny Glover, the artist as activist. Anyways,
And Castro told Danny how much he liked Lethal Weapon, as I recall.
And Danny told me that Lethal Weapon series was his way of making money to do the stories that he really wanted to do, that he produced. Anyway, so my memory of Randall is that he brought to the public, all of us, an awareness that we all needed and still need so much about our role, people of African descent's role in America and in international affairs, and fighting against this system that seems to be more determined every day to wipe us out of history and to diminish our point of view and to silence voices that don't agree with what they want to do.
Okay, thank you. I just got a message from Terrell Starr, who had to leave. He said he lost track of the agenda and he's got to take a plane. So Terrell, are you still with us? You can pop your head in here for a second. There you are. Okay.
Yeah. Hey.
Just give us the short version of what you were going to say.
Oh, no. I was going to have a conversation with you all about being a journalist in the digital age, by the way. Hello, everybody. I lost track of the flow of the agenda, so please forgive me. I am a student of Professor Leon Dash. I'm sure you all know him in some varying degrees. And I was going to recall my experience in Palestine and Israel and how shifting from or expanding my foreign affairs coverage from Eastern Europe and going into the Middle East for the first time really helped me to connect dots about oppression. A lot of us spent time, a lot of us talked about, oppressive systems. We're dealing with apartheid, and my work in foreign affairs focuses on whether it's white supremacy in the United States or how it operates in an apartheid state like South Africa. And other, the continent, much of it has a colonial, it has a colonial story, focus on colonialism and Russian aggression in Ukraine and across Eastern Europe. The point of it is that all these systems oppress us, and going to Palestine, really seeing the ways in which they were treated, going down the so-called sanitized roads, left an imprint in my spirit that is very much active and alive today. And it really is one that has, it is adjusting the trajectory of how I'm going to cover news in the future. And it's my work right now. I'm at the cusp of being I'm a digital reporter in the new media. Yet I started off in legacy media by doing a lot of the startup jobs that journalists of this era don't do, which is to attend city council meetings and actually get on the phone, but also go to actually go outside and actually talk to people. So, but yeah. So that was just going to be the gist of it. I would love to talk to y'all more about that in detail at another time. But I also, Randall Robinson, I've known very much. I know a lot about him, covered him. He's a person whose work I want to feature sometime this year. So I'll be reaching out to a lot of y'all in that regard too. So.
Okay, thanks, Terrell. Appreciate that. Before you leave,
can you say something about Palestine? What's going on in Palestine right now?
To be clear, I'm not an expert on that region. I really just focus more on I went there for almost a week, and a couple of organizations escorted us around, and including some soldiers from Breaking the Silence, an organization of former Israeli Defense Forces, about 1,000 of them. They basically, fight back against the Israeli government and talk about, the apartheid state type situation that's happening in Palestine. And they verbalize their own participation in this oppressive system. But generally what's happening right now with the protests is that Benjamin Netanyahu he has a litany of charges, of corruption charges against him. And there's a strong possibility that he could go to jail, which is, in a way, is pretty amazing, because for all the rules that our heads of state break, talking about putting them in jail is like blasphemy. But that other countries, even countries that have the corruption issues like Israel, that's a possibility. But the point of it is that this government, this quote unquote coalition government, is not really a coalition government, because Netanyahu is essentially saying that he has these most extremist people together and put them in positions of power just so he can maintain his own position. But he's been in politics for so long, you can never count Netanyahu out. But with the protests, they're called democracy protests pretty much because it's all about the judiciary, right? And making sure that not having the judiciary and pretty much corrupted. And so it ignores what is happening with the Palestinians, and so you have, on one hand, a very legitimate critique of their system, yet the most undemocratic behavior that's being carried out is against a group of people who don't have access to large portions of the country. I mean, i.e. roads. What really threw me off was that, as a Black person, I was able to walk the sanitized roads that Palestinians were removed from. And they literally are called sanitized roads. It's a very sickening type of thing. So what you all are talking about with the apartheid, you read about oppression, you know what it is and everything, but when you're actually walking through some type, that variant of a system, it transforms the way that you see the world. And as a Black person, just walking these streets and these Palestinians trying to sell whatever they're going to sell to you, and they have to stop at a checkpoint with an armed soldier with an automatic rifle, and I can walk down these streets that really belongs to him and these people. It left a really sickening feeling inside of me. And the point of my work and why I was so passionately tweeting about it, and it evoked the air of the kind of Zionist Twitter, but whatever, it really reinforced my belief that my mission, which is all oppression is awful, and I leverage my experience as a Black person who grew up in Detroit, Michigan, who lives in New York, and talks about the various forms of how inequity functions here in the United States. And I take that experience and it guides me wherever I see it across the world, even with white people that are in Ukraine, etc. And so, Palestine is just another addition to that. And whereas, to your question, because I veered away from it, and to close out, the protests are very much they very much are something of a contradiction. They're rightfully discussing one issue but completely ignoring another, and so it's a wild paradox.
Well, Terrell, one last thing, and that is we want to find. First of all, let me just say that and for this discussion, we look to see about if there have been Black journalists who have covered Israel and Palestine and the Mideast, and we could only find two from the United States, and that was decades ago. So
Wow.
yeah, I know, I know. We have a video that Mark Lamont Hill made about how Black Americans should, African Americans should view the Palestinian issue, and we have the link, I think, in the emails, but we'll play it later on if we have a chance. But the last thing I wanted to ask you was what impression were you left with about the journalism that is being conducted in coverage of the whole Middle East and Israel and Palestine issue? What should we?
Yeah. So I look at things from systems of oppression, and the fundamental issue with foreign affairs journalism, particularly from America, is that it's dominated by white males who don't understand inequity themselves. So foreign affairs reporting is a very prestigious, it's a very kind of lofty, on airs kind of thing, to get. And I think that the journalism suffers because we're not really understanding the root of the problem, and so they don't understand colonialism. I mean, because who talks, it's rare that you can go to the major publications and they talk about colonialism. They don't talk about the common ways in which the most oppressed people experience the politics of the region. Many of them are in the capital. I believe that the parliamentary version of I see somebody saying, Todd Smith saying only the Guardian. Yeah. But but the Kisnet, but unless it's all Kisnet centered, and Al Jazeera does a really great job, but most of the reporting that we need to see from our mainstream media is just disproportionately targeting power and ignores the oppressed, because that language is not even used. I'm not sure that an editor at the New York Times, for example, or Politico would even allow oppression or oppressed people to go through their copy editing process. And so I find that to be the fundamental problem. And of course, the lack of people of color. You have a world that's full of non-white people in the majority that's covered by a minority of white people, and it's all because of access and privilege. And we're not really getting the truth because the journalists don't even understand the truths and the failures of democracy in our own country. I covered 2 presidential elections so far, and I'm covering 2024. And anybody could tell you that you can go down to, you look at the Voter Rights Act that the Supreme Court, I think in 2011 to 2012, I think it was Section 5 that was struck down, which allows the southern states, and by the way, even New York was a part of, that Voter Rights Act. A number of northern states are a part of it. I know y'all know that, but a lot of the average folks don't know that. People think it's just the South, but at any rate, when you're looking at all the ways in which Republicans are undermining voter rights, legislation, and not having to go to the Department of Justice to get permission before they change their rules, there are failures and stress tests of democracy, and we don't even have to talk about what's happening in Tennessee. And so all of that ought to give us a sense of humility as we cover the world. Our ish stinks too, right? And until you really get that mindset, you're going to miss a lot because the reporting and the people who do it are so privileged that they're not going to have the right analysis to know to properly cover other places that in many respects that are dealing with the very same issues that we're dealing with in the States, but we don't want to position America as a country that's weakening and lacking in democracy because MLK ended all that.
All right. I heard that. Okay, well, thanks, Terrell. I'll just point out that in the latest Journal-isms column, there's an item there about the New York Times and Washington Post, both doing stories about how the world viewed Donald Trump being indicted, and they left out anybody from Africa, anybody from South America, anybody from Asia who was not in China or the Middle East.
Yeah, they don't go out and happy hour with them. They don't, they're not a part of their clubs, their glee club, whatever the hell, people, folks like that do. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me because, I have a number when I'm in Ukraine. As far as somebody who stays there long term, I'm the only person I know who's like a journalist who goes there and invests and who legitimately stays. There are a number of Black reporters who they'll go for a week here, a week there, like everyone else. But as far as being like embedded there in Ukraine in particular, there's a Black woman that's the Moscow bureau chief. She's at the Wall Street Journal.
Ann Simmons.
Yeah, Ann Simmons, who's great. She does. But I don't think that she's definitely not in Russia right now because one of her reporters was literally taken was literally accused of espionage, was a BS charge. But my point is that I'm working on a series focusing on Black refugees who fled Ukraine, and I'm doing this I'm like more than a year later. What's going on with them? It's an 8-part series that's going to publish sometime in the end of May.
Where is it going to be published?
Black Diplomats Podcast. It's my own podcast, and actually we're going to restart the show tomorrow, and I'm taping tomorrow, and I'm things I'm getting ready for that now. But basically, it's an 8-part series, and it's going to feature their stories. But the thing about it is that big places that have a lot of resources should have been doing so many kinds of investigations into what was going on with it, but no one cares about them. I mean, we have to be honest. Like the people of color, people from the continent, people from Asia were not included in these articles that you cited because people don't care about them, and we know this. But the reality is, for me, one of the reasons why I decided to be independent is because I just got tired of dealing with the whiteness that's embedded in this field. And I'm more financially secure as an independent reporter than I am working anyplace else. If I wanted to work at the Post or listen, you got where all these fancy places, I have enough brain matter to actually do it, but I don't think that I would be as dynamic. I don't think I'd be able to do the type of work that I do, right? And it didn't fit for me. And I think that some of the best reporting outside of this kind of traditional neoliberal approach to journalism is, those structures not equipped for it. And I know this because I have a number of my friends. Sometimes they invite me to take these jobs. I've had one job where someone, invited me to apply for a role as a White House correspondent. Had no interest in doing that whatsoever. And it was a nice job, paid me well, had no interest in doing it. And my friends, when you sit them down in happy hour, they're all miserable. I mean, the titles look good and everything is nice and I'm happy for them, but they're miserable. And I just knew because they had to deal with the structures of whiteness in their institutions. And I just had to tell, God knows who I am. And I just know that I can't do that. And it's okay. I think that we need people. I think that with Black folks, we need people everywhere. So there are a lot of people who are doing their thing at these big places and telling stories as best they can and doing excellently. But for me, I'm on the outside and I think I could I'm doing great foreign affairs work in my own voice and my own style because I don't have any limitations of what I can do or any limitations of how I can how I can succeed. So I have a book, right? I have a writing a book, Black Man's Guide to Eastern Europe, that's coming out. Well, I'm going to sign the contract in a couple of weeks. But I also I'm able to understand the business side, get more resources for myself, so that I can do a lot of these reportings that I'm doing now. I'm going to go back to Israel later this year. I'm going to spend a week in Gaza, and it's going to be on my own, my own money that I raised. But I'm going to be able to tell the story in the way that it ought to be told. And so there'll be one person, at least, if there's ever a story to be written about how the world sees, my stories are going to feature the people from the continent of Africa and feature the people from South America and Asia, because that is the editorial agenda of my work.
I heard that. Joanne, did you have your hand up, or is that just?
Yeah, I mean, I can say that's cool. Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. Well, let's. Anybody got any questions for Terrell before he departs?
Hey, Richard, this is John Yearwood. Hi,
yes,
good
John.
to see you, and good to see Terrell. Let me say that I've admired Terrell's work for a long time. And by the way, I'm here at Politico as the former global news editor at Politico.
Oh, cool. Wow. I mean,
and,
were you the first?
I'm sorry?
Were you the first? I'm sure you were.
In fact, I was. In fact, they created the position for me here at Politico.
Look at you.
And before then, I was the world editor at the Miami Herald for 13 years.
So you're currently the world editor?
No, I just left that position. Now I'm in the process of trying to bring more people who look like you and me to Politico.
Oh. And
that's the role I'm in now.
Excellent.
So no, but I thought it was interesting. I just wanted to say though, Terrell, that it was interesting that you mentioned Politico during the course of the talking about and some of the things that we have done in terms of coverage of the war and even coverage of the Middle East, particularly coverage of the Middle East. Some of those reports have been written by people of color, and one of the stories that we did about the war in Ukraine sort of compared it to what was going on in the Middle East that a few people were talking about at the time, and partly because we had journalists with that orientation to report on it. But that said, though, as I said, I've really enjoyed the work that you've done, and certainly, as you recall, we did a major story about you and your work in Ukraine that I know got a lot of attention. I haven't talked to you about it subsequently, so I'm not sure what your thinking was about that story. But I think that's probably where I think Richard may have first read about the work that you're doing.
No, it's good.
No, I think Malcolm.
So good to see you, and keep up the great work that you're doing.
Hey, thank you very much.
A quick question: does Terrell speak Ukrainian or Russian?
Russian. I have Russian. I'm taking Ukrainian now.
Thank you.
Okay, Jesse, good to hear you. When I said that there were two Black journalists who had covered the Middle East, one of them was Jesse Lewis in the late 60s. So I'm glad that he's with us. That was for the Washington Post.
Excellent.
Anything else you want to say, Jesse?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for Terrell before he departs? Oh, but I have a question for John. Can you hear me, John? Okay. Who are some of these writers in Politico we should be following then that you say that are giving us the right perspective?
Well, you should follow Nahal Tusi, who covers the Middle East.
Oh, I know who he is. Yeah.
Yeah, I know and she's been doing an amazing job of covering the region. She's been doing it for quite some time and has been breaking stories, a lot of stories on the region. Joseph Gideon He's a young reporter that we just brought on a few years ago. Spent a lot of time living and working in the Middle East. Now he's actually one of our attached to our office in Ottawa. But he does a lot of stories that's based on his history of covering the region. And so we've got folks that are doing it. And in fact, during Ukraine, he did a lot of stories about what's happened to the ships and things. In fact, he made a really good sort of a database on what's happened to all of the aircraft and the ships that the Ukrainian oligarchs own. But in addition to that, he did some stories in which he brought his experience of living in the Middle East to bear on that coverage. So those are just two people that, among the others that you can follow.
Excellent. Thank you, John. Okay, I think we're going to move up to our introduction. And during that time, people who haven't said anything can do so then on either of the topics, the Middle East or Randall Robinson. So let's start with Sharon Farmer, who I see in the top left of my screen. Sharon, please introduce yourself.
Yes, Southeast DC, still alive and well. And I'm so glad to see all y'all, especially the ones that had a lot to do with my youthful years at the Washington Post and Howard University's community newspaper. Nothing beats a failure but a chat, and I'm a witness.
All right. Sharon is our photographer. And she was recently honored, let's say, at the National Press Photographers Association. So congratulations, Sharon. All right.
Power to the people, people to the power.
Yes. Carlin Barker. Oh, we can't hear you. Please unmute.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Just introduce yourself if you can.
Well, I'm Carlin Barker, and I worked at the Washington Post for 35 years. And I came to this Zoom meeting today because I did cover the demonstrations at the South African Embassy, all of them that were going on, and was a huge admirer of Randall Robinson, one of my few heroes. So I really wanted to be in on this talk today. And I guess what I remember most is how ingenious they were at getting people like me to come out there every day to cover these demonstrations. And they would get celebrities, they would get a school group, they would get a choir, they were all going to get arrested. They managed to do something different. I don't know if Cecelie is still with us, but I know that she had a lot to do with organizing what was going on outside the embassy. And so I wanted to say hi to her because I haven't seen her in years, but I talked to her practically every day when I was doing those stories. But it took an issue that had been around for such a long time, and it brought it to the forefront, and it got the publicity and the coverage that it needed. It got places like the Washington Post and New York Times out there to write about it on a regular basis. And that plus the divestiture movement. I think the divestiture movement, even more than the protests outside the embassy, are what finally, started to have an impact and get rid of that policy.
All right. Thank you, Carlin. You can write a note in the chat because we're going to print out the chat comments, and then everybody will get a copy when this is over. E.R. Ship.
Hi, everybody. I'm here from Baltimore, teaching at Morgan State University. I joined tonight because I thought it was going to be a fascinating conversation, and I've not been disappointed. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you. Allison Davis. We heard from you earlier, but anything you want to add about?
No, this has been, I'm Allison Davis, and this has been extraordinary. I'm so glad to have been a part of this discussion, and also to share remembrance of such a great man.
All right. James Michael Brody, first timer. You got to unmute.
Yes, I'm going to be really honest. I feel I'm uniquely unqualified to be in such an amazing group of journalists. But but I am honored and humbled. You know, I was a student at the University of Colorado in the 70s when we got involved in the anti-apartheid movement, and we were pushing for divestiture and everything else. And Randall was one of those people who inspired us in those days, and along with his brother, who inspired me to want to go into journalism. You know, they were really key pieces of my life. I'm really been fascinated just hearing the stories about him. And by the way, Professor Chip, I'm just down Cold Spring Lane from you, right near the Pep Boys. So greetings from Baltimore as well.
All right.
And,
Come by campus. Let's have a cup of coffee. Or
yes,
something.
ma'am. I'm right up. I can walk to you. I can walk up to you.
That's great. All right, Isaiah Poole, whose accounts of these roundtables you may have read from the last few sessions.
Yeah, and I had a wonderful, it was a wonderful and tremendously informative discussion. Glad to be a part of it. Somewhere buried in dusty archives are a couple of articles I wrote featuring Randall Robinson. Certainly everything we've said about his knowledge, his command of the issues, and what he did to make sure that we had an international perspective that took into account the entire African diaspora, that was invaluable. So I'm glad we did this discussion today, and really thankful that we also put Israel and Palestine and the struggle going on there under the spotlight as well.
All right, thank you. Joanne Lyons-Wooten, who many of us know from NABJ.
Good evening. I'm always so inspired when I'm in your company. NABJ just holds a very special place in my heart, and I thoroughly enjoyed this evening's meaningful, insightful discussion. Delighted to be involved.
All right. Joanne was executive director at one point and also later the director of development for NABJ. And that's why their coffers are so full. Okay. Jesse Lewis. We can't see you, but we can hear you. Uh-oh, maybe we can't hear you either.
You can hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for including me. Nice to see some familiar names. Sometimes this is the first time I've seen the faces, though. I'm glad to be here. I really no comments at all. Just
but tell us who you are first. Introduce yourself.
Yeah, I started at the Washington Post as a copy boy in 1962, and my last substantive job was Middle East correspondent for the Post based in Beirut for 3 years. I had Arabic actually at university and lived in the Middle East in the Arab world even before joining the Post in '62 as a copy boy. And after the Post, I went on to write a book about naval power in the Mediterranean. Then I joined the U.S. State Department until from 1975 to '82, and then I've done crisis communication, specializing in providing emergency PR, someone else, emergency communication services following shipping accidents. The accident many of you might have heard about was the pirate attack on the Maersk, Alabama, in the Indian Ocean off the coast of Mombasa in Kenya. I was there for it. Met Captain Phillips, took him to the airport to fly back to the United States. He came in on a ship called the Bainbridge, a U.S. naval ship called the Bainbridge. Interestingly, the Bainbridge is named after a U.S. naval officer that fought the Barbary pirates in Europe in the Mediterranean in the 18th century.
Okay, Jesse, we got to cut you off.
Well, I didn't know what I'm supposed to say, Richard. I don't know what I'm supposed to say.
All right. Cecelie Counts is back. She must have heard Carlin. So, Cecelie, what do you have to tell us?
Yes. I did hear my name mentioned. I want to thank all of you, but I just wanted to lift up one person who would be here, except that he's gone on, and that's George Wilson, who did so much to help educate our community about the work TransAfrica was doing, because a lot of it was pretty complicated. I mean, like I said, the issues that were relatively easy to explain were those around apartheid, because it was so similar to the United States. And I can assure you that if Randall was alive today, he'd be talking about Israel and Palestine in comparable terms. But I just wanted to highlight the fact that Randall understood that our struggles are all connected. TransAfrica wrote a statement of opposition to the confirmation of Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court.
Whoa.
When I was at the NAACP, and that statement talked about, like John Hope Franklin did in the introduction to the NAACP report explaining why the organization opposed that nomination, that we have always had traitors to the race. And essentially he was one. And I just wanted to highlight that to show, again, the pain of the issue. The pain that I feel most is that so much of the work of TransAfrica is not known, and that we did lose on a lot of issues, but in the sense that the struggle continues, we didn't lose at all. Randall knew it was a relay race, and he has passed it on. Everyone who I know who has worked at TransAfrica has continued to do work around issues that disproportionately impact people of African descent, no matter where they live.
All right, thank you. In the course of working on this roundtable, I discovered that Ronald Williams, who you might know,
yes,
Cecelie, is writing a book about TransAfrica. So
yes,
perhaps it'll be better known when his book comes out. Gene Meyer.
Hi, I'm Gene Meyer, and I didn't know Randall Robinson. I didn't cover the apartheid story. I have been to Israel a couple of times, not in about 10 years, and I can tell you that there are Jewish Israelis working with Arab Israelis to fight for better conditions and also for the Bedouin communities in Israel, and that the Supreme Court that Netanyahu is trying to defang has been one of the defenders of rights for Israeli Arabs. So there are some forces, although on the defensive and clearly now in the minority, that are trying to bring justice and equity to the situation. And so that's all I have to contribute on that subject. Otherwise, I continue to talk about Fight for Freedom, the African-American soldiers in John Brown's Army. 5 years after publication, I still get invitations to give talks. I was over in the Eastern Shore at the St. Michael's Public Library. And in October, Harpers Ferry National Historic Park is going to issue a reprint of Osborne Perry Anderson's A Voice from Harpers Ferry. He was the sole survivor and wrote the only insider account of the raid. And so that's kind of a big deal. And they've asked me to write an essay to accompany it, and I'm looking forward to that. And as always, I always learn so much from these roundtables, and so good to see old friends and new friends. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Gene, and good luck with all your endeavors, of which you have many. All right, Darren Snyder.
Oh, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Richard. My name is Darren Snyder. Spent like 25 years at Gannett after graduating from Howard, first at USA Today, then Fort Myers, Florida. Took a buyout from Gannett in 2009. Spent about 11 years at the Washington Times. Most of my career in journalism has been spent in the quote unquote toy department, the sports department.
Right.
We don't really like to be called the toy department, but I've been mostly a sports journalist. So every time I come to these roundtables and watching 60 Minutes, I always feel like it makes me smarter. So I like to just be in the presence of people who are, in the quote unquote real journalism world, and just kind of soak it in. So thanks for having me, Richard.
All right, thanks for being here, Darren. Elliot Francis.
Hi, Richard, and hi to you. Let's say I spent 45 years as a television news anchor, reporter around the country at various outlets. Currently host and producer of Now with Elliot Francis, live streamed each week over YouTube and Facebook. Just some fascinating memories, remarkable memories out there tonight. And so I thank you all for that 1 hour. Thanks, Richard.
Okay, thank you, Elliot. John, we've heard from you, but if there's anything you want to add, now's the time.
Yes, Richard. In terms of my title, I mentioned I'm involved in helping to make political look a lot more like America in terms of as the editorial director of diversity and culture. But in terms of Randall, if you permit me 5-10 seconds, Richard, to tell a really quick story about many years ago, flying from Morocco to London. And the gentleman sitting next to me was a member of the board of the German Marshall Fund. And he mentioned that he was walking down the street in Washington one day and he saw this building for sale. And he got back, they were looking for a new office center. And it turns out that the building for sale that he saw was the TransAfrica building, which many of us who covered TransAfrica and Randall Robinson spent a good bit of time in. So it meant a lot to me. And I believe the building is still owned by the German Marshall Fund. And since we're talking about Randall and talking about Africa, maybe a good point, Richard, if we mention that another journalist who passed who did really good coverage of Africa was Michel Marriott. Not sure if you mentioned him before I came on, but we did with Jibril Diallo and others, some really good coverage in terms of bringing voices and stories from Africa to the American audiences. Thank you, good night, and thanks again for another great roundtable.
Great. I was able to add a link to a piece that that Michelle did from South Africa in the latest Journal-isms, partly thanks to Jibril, who contacted me from Senegal this morning. So thanks for that connection. Brenda Wilson. You got to put that on mute, please.
Very quickly. I already spoke about I must have had encountered him long before I called him up. I wouldn't have called someone out of the blue in 1979 and asked him to show up at 5 o'clock. But I was the sort of person who, long even before I got into journalism, followed what was going on in Africa and had become more or less a follower of Randall Robinson. I'm here tonight mainly because of him. You know, the man has my heart and he has my brain because he educated me. And one of the things I've always said is that, you know, what I knew about Johannesburg was a Gil Scott-Heron song. And so he opened up, you know, a world to me and what I should know, and ultimately where I traveled to. And so I was happy eventually in 2012 to meet him there when Ken Walker and other Americans had worked with the South African government to acknowledge and recognize what, in fact, Randall Robinson had done in the struggle here. And I want to tell you, working inside, you know, some of these news organizations, it was very sad. I do remember when the transition occurred. I do remember some of the tensions. I do remember some of the heartache and stuff that occurred that didn't get reported because I don't think anybody wanted to rain on a parade on something, on the sunshine that was occurring. But I do remember some of the hurt and, you know, the quiet around the unacknowledgement. Everybody wanted to acknowledge the struggle, the fight that South African had made, but I don't think that people always wanted to acknowledge. Certainly white Americans didn't. I worked in a news organization that didn't want to acknowledge the participation of Black people in America in that struggle, who were saying that that was not, in fact, the linchpin or the thing that moved things. And
Are you talking about NPR?
Yes, I was. You know, I'm
I wanted to be clear.
You know, there's nothing you can be clear, but in fact, I was confronted by people there because I think he was on a fast that had more to do with Haiti at the time, but the transition was occurring. And I thought that within that coverage, when the transition was occurring, that an acknowledgement of the participation that had been led by people like Mary Berry and, you know, I'm forgetting all the names, but and Randall Robinson and these people who had led those demonstrations in front of South Africa embassy, that it should be acknowledged. And they were like, no, it was the South African struggle. It was, and there were people, you know, across the ocean who participated in that refusal to not acknowledge. And I finally called up South African friends and I said, am I missing something? Do I not understand something? Did this not have an impact? Did this have no effect? And was then educated by South Africans about the struggle that went back, you know, into the 50s and beyond, and the Pan-African movement. You know, so for me, it was someone whose heart has always been for Africans, and so therefore I don't even know how I knew about Randall Robinson, but I knew about Randall Robinson and his family and Marilyn Robinson. These were names that I knew. It was part of my own education about Black Americans who were involved in, you know, a larger struggle than just our struggle here. They were involved in the struggle in the United States and the struggle in Africa. So that, you know, this was a man I admired. That's why I'm here this evening.
Okay, thanks, Brenda.
And okay, I'll shut up.
This is Cecelie again.
Up here.
All right,
Hi.
Roger Witherspoon.
Well, wait, Cecelie was trying to.
Could I
Cecelie
just
wants to say
add,
something else?
I just wanted to add that, again, TransAfrica tried to highlight the long history of African-American activism around Africa. We brought, for example, CLR James was featured at one of the dinners because of his historic work through the century. We put together a book that documented some of the organizations that involved Paul Robeson and people like that over the years that were quashed either by the FBI or by lack of funds or whatever. But it is very true. Randall always acknowledged that work had been done before he started working around the issues of Portuguese colonialism and the US cooperation with Portugal to control Angola, Mozambique, Cape Verde, Guinea-Bissau, long before there was TransAfrica. He was an activist. And he recognized that activism was necessary, but it was often unrecognized, unappreciated, and not acknowledged. He really, although people sometimes accused him of being a media hound, he knew you needed press attention to amplify the issue, but we worked on so many things that we knew would never be recognized. And so you're absolutely right. The South Africans, I mean, I was in a meeting where the future leadership told us, once we become a state, we won't be dealing with you community groups. We'll be dealing with the state. And you know, our response to that was, your community is going to have all the problems our community has multiply. So you better stay in touch. But that was their attitude.
All right. One question of clarification. When you mentioned George earlier as having covered the situation well, you were talking about George Curry?
No, I'm talking about, well, George Curry did too, but I was talking about George Wilson and that urban radio network. I can't remember the exact network that he worked for. But again, this was before email. This was before cell phones. I remember when we got our first fax machine and we wondered, would this be useful? And so George, as people have said, Randall was a good teacher, but George really made you break it down for the audience of urban radio around the country.
Yes.
George Wilson.
Yes, I remember he covered Capitol Hill for many years.
Right.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Joe Ritchie from Thailand. Unmute, please.
Unmute. Okay, I got it.
Okay.
Yeah. I mentioned in the chat, and I guess I was in some ways one of the first mainstream media folks that Randall had kind of co-opted to get the story out, and we were one of the first places to reveal through Randall when he when after Pete Botha visited Washington in '81, and the Reagan administration with Chester Crocker, who was his Africa guy in the State Department, they were pushing the new idea of constructive engagement, and Randall passed on to me some papers. We got a story that I posted there onto the front page, at least for one edition of the Washington Post, revealing the so-called attempt to rid South Africa of its cat status, as Chester Crocker put it. And that story I had reverberations. It went on. It took a few years before the Free South Africa movement got the traction that it got in about '84 and after that. But it started, I think, with that 1981 revelation of the new approach of the Reagan administration, thanks largely to Chester Crocker, who I think Randall in his book had a very colorful description of him, and I recommend anyone to go look up Randall's first book, Defending the Spirit, to see how he described the I think the anal approach to the expression on Chester Crocker's face. Anyway, that story went on. I shared with you, Richard, how that story did go on to the front page of the Post back in May of '81 for one edition. Ben Bradley didn't like the sourcing. I was able to verify the authenticity of the State Department papers that were leaked to Randall and that he passed on to me by calling up the desk officer, the South Africa desk officer at home. We had on the foreign desk at the Post, we had a directory of State Department officials, including home numbers. The guy was home sick that day. And he said, yeah, you've got, those are the real papers, the briefing papers. Yes, it's authentic, blah, blah, blah. And so we went with the story, but Bradley decided that the sourcing wasn't strong enough. And I'm just this little guy on the foreign desk. I wasn't Oberdorfer or John Goshko, the people who covered the State Department. So they took the story and bumped it inside. But it stayed on the front of the International Herald Tribune, and I'd like to think that might have helped give it some worldwide traction. Anyway, that's my small contribution. And I remember Randall Robinson for his persistence, how he kept driving. From that little nugget, we went on to the Free South Africa movement, and I think eventually we got people in Congress on both sides of the aisle, although people like Gray and Howard Wolpe really pushed it. And
okay, Joe, we got to cut it off.
That's enough. All
right. Cynthia Kirkwood from
yes,
from Portugal, from Thailand to Portugal.
Cynthia Kirkwood. Thank you for asking me tonight. I didn't know Randall Robinson well, but I met him several times. I had gone to Washington, D.C., 1977. I'd gotten a Watson Fellowship, and I went to East Africa to look at changes and their effects on Muslim women. And I went back to D.C., I met him. I don't remember a building at the time. I remember an office full of people, small and cramped, but that could just be my memory, but he was intense, incredibly intense, I thought. and sensitive, very sensitive. I'm not surprised that he left the States, you know, but.
Although he did come back to teach at Penn State's law school.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Right. Well, I went on to Hopkins School for Advanced International Studies and then the summer program for minority journalists. After writing for Washington Afro-American, I went to UC Berkeley and began reporting until I was about 30, and I left and began writing fiction, which was my plan all along, and went to work for the San Francisco Chronicle as a copy editor, which was perfect. I could write in the morning and you know, write heads and edit in the afternoon and night.
Hey, Cynthia, we have to wrap it up.
And then I left the States in 94. And this is when a young woman yesterday said, 1994, I wasn't born yet, but that's when I left the States. And I live in Portugal now.
All right, thanks, Cynthia. Ken Walker.
Yeah, I met Randall for the first time just before my first trip to South Africa in 1981, when working for the Washington Star. And he was very helpful in helping me identify people in the anti-apartheid movement that I needed to be in touch with once I got there. And of course, since then, I maintained close contact with him on the relevant issues. And he's a star. He's a star in our cosmos. I'll never forget him.
Okay, thanks, Kenny. I want to clarify, Cecelie just told me that while he did teach at Penn State, he taught only from St. Kitts. He was in St. Kitts while he was teaching at Penn State Law School. So that's a clarification. Thank you, Cecelie, for that. Who haven't we heard from yet?
Me, honey. Mary.
Oh, Mary, I can't
That's
even see
okay.
you. Let's see. I'm on the wrong screen.
Mary C. Curtis. I'm from in Charlotte now, office in DC. I'm a columnist at Roll Call, host of its Equal Time podcast, guest host for Slate's What Next daily podcast, and senior leader with the Op-Ed Project. And just want to say a couple of words about my former New York Times colleague, Michelle Marriott, who, besides being an amazing person, was a journalist who was on the cutting edge of recognizing the importance of covering tech. He was a great person and also an incredibly innovative and creative thinker, and just thinking about him quite a bit.
Thank you, Mary. And Ketchy, are you there? And Ketchy Taifa, who was with us
I'm
on our
here.
reparations roundtable a few months ago.
Thank you. Real quick, I'm not a journalist, but this has just been so very nostalgic. Shout out to Cecelie Counts and Gwen McKinney from back in the day. Thanks to Randall Robinson. My first two arrests were at his behest. I got arrested in front of the South African embassy, along with celebrities and the like, and I got arrested in front of the White House and in support of democracy for Haiti. So those times are very near and dear to my heart. And the third time was in front of the Longworth House office building in support of statehood of the District of Columbia, but that one wasn't Brenda Robinson. But just in a nutshell, I worked for an organization called the Washington Office on Africa, which predated TransAfrica, which was a church and union sponsored, primarily white organization, even though it was at the time I was there, was headed by Jean Sindab, who was a dynamic, badass Black woman. But when TransAfrica came into prominence under the leadership of Randall Robinson, was legitimate, immediate legitimacy in the Black community, because this was a Black-led movement, a Black-led organization, and the like. So I just wanted to say thank you for having this. And again, it's just nostalgic listening to everybody.
Thank you. And Kichi, my sister from many decades back, I just like to add that Randall's point always was that as long as African Americans paid taxes, we needed to have a voice in US foreign policy. And US foreign policy was wrong basically everywhere around the world. And the impact of US foreign policy had a disproportionate impact on Africans of people of African descent, whether they were in Central America and victims of the so-called war against the Contras, whether they were in the Pacific Islands and victims of nuclear testing, whether they were in the Middle East, because there are Black people all through the Middle East. I spent a month in Israel, Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon, and all of us could live there, and you could drop those countries in the middle of Howard University and try to sort people out. But the Black world is everywhere, and the US is on the wrong side, unfortunately, usually everywhere. And Randall was really brilliant at explaining that to people. Pick a country, whether it was Western Sahara occupied by Morocco, whether it was Somalia, Sudan, whether it was the IMF and the World Bank and the so-called Bretton Woods institutions, which most people only know of a local bank. And so Randall was brilliant at explaining to people that, you go to a local bank and you're discriminated against. The countries of the world where the people look like us are discriminated by banks that were set up in the United States. He would break it down that basically. And again, yes, Michelle, I can think of so many journalists, Carlin, who really made a difference, but he was very clear that our community had to hear it quick. And unfortunately, we did all this work before email, before Twitter, before any of that. When we were cranking things out with a blue,
mimeograph machine.
Mimeograph machine. Yes, yes. We were calling a messenger to deliver things. That's why a fax machine opened up our world. And that was the point of TransAfrica. It's not that the work that preceded us wasn't important, but it was important for African Americans to actually lobby Congress and to understand how the US government works. It's one thing to pass a law, it's another thing to implement that law. And that's why it was so sad, but so informative to see how the executive branch under Ronald Reagan did not implement sanctions. They eviscerated the law through the regulatory scheme, which is a painful lesson for any law. But try to translate that to regular people, and it's pretty hard. But we have to keep trying. Again, I brought up William Monroe Trotter because Randall was a Black radical. and Black radicals have existed throughout our time in the United States, and they exist throughout our diaspora. And we have to lift all the Black radicals up because they're too often forgotten.
And one quick point, you could always trust the information. I may be very emotional about who he was, but you could always trust his information. And for journalists, that's really important.
Yes, he was a taskmaster with his staff. I can attest.
Very good with the information.
Yeah, it had to be right.
Out there skating was right. Yes, it was correct.
Right.
Yes. All right. The final introductory. The final person doing introduction, I guess, will be Rochelle Riley, who has written about Black excellence.
Thank you so much. Please forgive the picture. I'm doing you a favor. Rochelle Riley. I am a writer by trade, warrior by necessity, always, but I also serve as Director of Arts and Culture for the city of Detroit. I want to thank Mary and everyone else who said something about Michelle. That was a very heartbreaking loss for someone who watched him be an excellent journalist, an excellent man for so long. And I'm so glad to see so many of what we call the old heads on the screen. I see Ship and I see Joanne and Allison and Sharon, and I hope that we see all of us in Birmingham. I'm glad we're having NABJ in a smaller venue. I'm looking forward to being there. I booked my room and my flight. And I want to say this, it is so important. I was so glad that Cecelie was just talking about what she was talking about. When I think about how far we've come, literally, where we worked without cell phones and we worked, when she said the fax machine changed our lives, I thought about that being the title of a book.
Good idea.
I just want to make sure that we are teaching our young people just how different their lives are as young journalists with all the tools they have now. There is no excuse for them not to be excellent because they literally have everything. And they are literally trying to outrun AI and AR and all the other things that people are trying to do to keep us from having humans do the job. So if you know some, each one, reach one, teach one, as Bob Maynard used to say, and let's make sure that we are keeping it going because we're losing journalists who would rather be TV stars than journalists. So thank you so much, everybody. I'm sorry I was a little late, but I got pulled into something. When you work for the mayor, you work for him 24 hours a day. But I'll look at the recording to see what I missed. But just amazing, amazing work as always, Richard. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rochelle. And finally, the producer of this webcast, Benita Bing. Benita?
Good
She's the
evening,
one who made
everyone.
up those instructions for how to watch this thing. Go right ahead, Benita, please.
I want to say, George Wilson, I had the opportunity to work with George doing an internship with him when I first came up on Capitol Hill, working with him as a radio reporter, which was a great experience. And he was known as GW on the Hill. So, that was a great experience. I learned a lot from him. And I'm glad I had that opportunity. I got to meet a lot of the Congressional Black Caucus members working with him, learning about Randall Robinson and other folks during that time period that I worked with George. So thank you for reminding me about him.
Yes.
I'm Benita Bing, president of the Exposure Group, African American Photographers Association, located here in Washington, D.C. Also, the owner of Talbot and Bing Studios, located in the Brooklyn Northeast section of DC, and the producer of this Zoomcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, I think that's a wrap. Thanks everybody for enlightening us, and I hope to see you. As I said, there will be a printout of the chat room if all goes well. Chat comments that everybody will get. And I also wanted to give a shout out to those watching on Facebook. Thank you for joining us. And I hope to see you all next month for our May meeting.
Thank you,
All right.
Richard.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.
Okay.
Everybody.
And don't forget that video from Mark Lamont Hill about why what the Black Americans should be concerned about the Palestinians. All right. See you all next month. Thanks again. Okay.